The aroma of freshly baked naan and spiced butter chicken floated through the marble-floored house like a warm embrace. Laughter echoed from the dining table, polished to perfection, lit by a chandelier that Karan had imported from Italy. The house was grand, every inch screaming wealth and success. But somehow, it didn't feel like home to Arvind Mira. He sat at the edge of the long table, half smiling, half listening. More of a guest in his daughter's home than a father. So anyway, we closed the deal in Dubai last week. 2 million USD, cleared, Karan said with a self-satisfied smirk, stabbing his fork into the lamb on his plate. The others nodded, his business friends, his social circle, people Arvind had only met tonight. Rhea, his daughter, sat beside her husband, trying to match his energy with a proud smile. Arvind gave a polite nod. He wasn't impressed by numbers anymore. He had once built bridges across rivers where no one dared go. But that was another life. A life no one in this room seemed to care about. Karan leaned back in his chair, glass of wine in hand. His voice had that familiar edge, the kind people mistake for confidence, but is really just control. "So Uncle Arvind," he said, sarcasm dripping from the uncle, though he was his father-in-law, "what's keeping you busy these days?" "Still trimming the hedges at the community garden." There was polite laughter. Someone even chuckled harder than they meant to. Arvind raised his eyes. Calm, kind, weathered. "I've been helping out at the orphanage down the lane. They had a burst water pipe, so plumbing now." "Wow!" Karan cut in, raising his glass in mock toast. From engineer to handyman. That's quite the fall. The laughter was louder this time. Rhea said nothing. Her smile faltered, but she didn't defend her father. Arvind looked at her, just briefly, then back at his plate. He said nothing. Karan wasn't done. "You know, I've always said this to Rhea. Some people are born to lead. Others, they just drift. You're a good example, Mr. Mira. You're a good man. Sure, but you're not someone anyone can rely on. I mean, what have you really done lately?" Silence fell. The words hung like knives in the air. "You're worthless. You can't be relied on." The final blow. And for the first time that night, Arvind stopped chewing. He put down his spoon gently, lifted his eyes. For a moment something flickered there. Not anger, but something deeper. Sadness, perhaps, or disappointment. He pushed back his chair slowly, the wood scraping softly against the tiles. All eyes were on him now. He looked straight at Karan, and his voice came low, even, controlled.
"Is that so?"
he asked. Karan blinked, slightly thrown off by the unexpected calm. Arvind nodded. "You've had your say. Let me have mine." He looked around the room. Every face turned toward him, some amused, some curious. "You see this suit I'm wearing?" he asked, softly. "Rhea bought it for me. Last year for my birthday. I wear it on days I think she might remember I'm her father." The room went still. Arvind turned to Rhea, his gaze steady. "You were 9 when your mother died. You cried in my arms that night, asking who would braid your hair the next morning. I learned how to braid hair that week." Rhea looked down. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. He turned back to Karan. "You say I'm worthless. Maybe. But the roof above your head, the college degree your wife holds, the wedding you both had, that was all paid for with what little worth I once had. I sold the last of my land to make sure Rhea had the wedding she dreamed of, and I never said a word. Because that's what fathers do. They give. Silently. No one laughed now. Karan shifted uncomfortably. "You think I'm a joke, I get it. You measure men in millions, not in meaning. But let me tell you something, Karan." He stepped closer. "Never confuse silence with weakness. Never mistake dignity for defeat." He picked up his coat from the back of the chair. "You're right. I haven't done much, recently. But life has a strange way of showing who's reliable and who's not. Just wait." With that, he turned and walked out of the dining room. No one stopped him. As he stepped into the quiet of the night, the stars above shimmered faintly. He took a deep breath, the cool air biting, refreshing. He walked slowly, alone, but not broken, His phone buzzed. It was a message from Rajiv, his old colleague from 20 years ago. "We're restarting the Himlok project." Gov cleared it. "I told them I know the only man who can lead it. You up for it?" A tiny smile formed at the corners of Arvind's lips. He didn't reply right away. He looked up at the sky, then at the road ahead. "Worthless," he whispered to himself. "Let's see who says that when I'm done." The early morning sun broke through the smog, heavy clouds as Arvind Mira stood by the window of his modest apartment, sipping lukewarm tea from a cracked ceramic mug. The world outside buzzed with activity. Honking cars, street vendors shouting their deals, and schoolchildren racing past with half-open bags. But inside, the silence was sharp, peaceful, but laced with something deeper, absence. He sat at his old wooden desk, the one he had kept since the 80s, and opened the drawer. From within, he pulled out a worn leather file, its edges frayed, filled with yellowing certificates, old photos, and folded letters. He placed the file on the desk and opened it. At the very top was a faded photograph, a younger version of him in a hard hat, standing in front of an under-construction bridge in the remote Himalayan village of Himlok, smiling with muddy boots and wind-bitten skin. Arvind smiled faintly. That was the man he once was, a builder, a thinker. Flashback at 1986, Himlok district. The terrain was unforgiving, snow-capped cliffs, narrow passes, and no roads in sight. The government had declared Himlok unreachable. That's when Arvind, then a young and fiercely idealistic civil engineer, volunteered to take the challenge. "You're crazy," his supervisor had said. But Arvind didn't see danger. He saw purpose. For 18 months, he and a team of 30 workers blasted through rock, designed a 3-pillar suspension bridge, and built roads through unstable hillsides. He lived in tents, braved landslides, fought for funding, and ate rice boiled in river water. And when the bridge finally opened, villagers cried. Some walked across barefoot in reverence. He was hailed as a hero. His name appeared in civil engineering magazines. He gave a tech-style talk before tech was even a thing. He was offered a job in Europe. But then came the betrayal. One of his junior officers, Sumanth Rao, who had once worked under him, manipulated internal audits, and shifted the blame for a collapsed retaining wall in another project. Arvind, known for his integrity, refused to play politics. He took the fall in silence. Back in the present, Arvind turned the page to find an old letter from Rhea, written in her teenage handwriting. "Papa, you're the strongest person I know. One day I'll make you proud. I promise." He touched the words gently and smiled. That afternoon, he walked to the orphanage, a small red bricked building tucked between a clinic and an abandoned school. Sister Maria, the head of the orphanage, greeted him with her usual warm smile. "Mr. Mira, you fixed the broken tap already?" He shrugged. It wasn't a big job, just needed the right valve. The children ran to him, hugging his legs, calling him Baba J, the name they had given him. He taught them math, told them stories of places they'd never seen. And sometimes, after the work was done, he'd sit in the courtyard and sketch bridges in the dirt. It wasn't prestige, but it was peace. That evening, as he returned home, he received a second message from Rajiv. "The project kickoff is in 2 weeks. They want you on site. We need your signature and clearance." Arvind hesitated. He hadn't worn a formal suit in years. He hadn't set foot on a construction site since the scandal. But something inside him stirred. Not pride, not revenge, but a desire to build again. Not just structures, but dignity. Purpose. Legacy. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. Gray hair, wrinkled skin, a small scar above his eyebrow from a fall in '93. Still standing, still capable, still Arvind Mehra. Meanwhile, in the comfort of their luxury home, Karan was pacing inside his study. The numbers didn't add up. The new crypto investment he'd sunk capital into had tanked. His Dubai partners were pulling out. And a small but persistent rumor had begun to spread online. An old master engineer is back, leading the next big government project. A man once silenced by politics. Karan scoffed when Rhea showed him the news article. Some retired grandpa in boots and khakis. Come on. That kind of man can't survive in this market. He didn't even look at the name. But Rhea did. And her hands shook as she read the words at the bottom. Chief Consultant Mr. Arvind Mehra, retired SC, Gov of India Civil Division. Her father, her silent, broken, soft-spoken father, was building again. A chill ran down her spine, because she knew somehow everything was about to change. 2 weeks later, a convoy of jeeps rumbled up a dusty hill road leading to the Himlok project site, nestled between towering cliffs and dense pine forests. The air was thinner up here, the silence crisper, and the stakes higher. Arvind Mehra stepped out of the lead jeep. His worn leather boots sank slightly into the damp soil. Around him, young engineers, site workers, and surveyors buzzed like bees. Equipment was scattered, scaffolding half-built. The land was difficult, unpredictable, but Arvind was not overwhelmed. He had faced mountains before, and he had conquered them. The young project manager, Arav Sharma, rushed toward him with a nervous grin. Barely in his 30s, eager, sharp-minded, but visibly green in the field. "Sir, Mr. Mehra, welcome. We've heard so much about you. Honestly, it's an honor." Arvind nodded. "The honor lies in the work, son. Let's see what needs fixing." Within hours, he was poring over blueprints, analyzing soil reports, and recalibrating faulty slope gradients. His decades of experience lit the eyes of the younger engineers. This was not a man who needed validation. He didn't boast. He simply did. Every measurement was precise. Every suggestion quiet but firm. By the end of the day, Arav turned to his assistant and said, "This man, he's a machine. Why did the country let someone like him fade away?" Arvind overheard it and just smiled. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away in the city, Karan's world was cracking. The Dubai deal had collapsed. A lawsuit was on the horizon. 2 of his major investors had pulled out after a leak about manipulated numbers. Karan tried to stay composed, but even Rhea noticed the beads of sweat forming at the edge of his hairline. Their home was filled with tension now, less wine, more silence. Fewer parties, more phone calls that ended with slamming doors. Rhea found herself alone more often, sipping cold coffee on the balcony, staring into space. Her thoughts drifted to her father. Not the man humiliated at her dining table, but the man in the news who was rebuilding mountains. Back at the Himlok site, weeks passed. Monsoon threatened delays, but Arvind had anticipated it. He redesigned the drainage before the first drop of rain fell. He climbed embankments with a walking stick and a hard hat, pointing out structural flaws others missed. When the workers complained about food shortages, he called in a favor from a village sarpanch he once helped decades ago. Within hours, supplies arrived. Arav was stunned. "How do you know everyone?" he asked. "I built roads to these villages once. But I built relationships too. Turns out they last longer." That night, Arvind sat by the workers' campfire, eating simple rice with them, laughing quietly, telling stories about bridges and rivers and lost maps. For the first time in years, he felt like himself. Not a burden, not forgotten, but a builder once more. One afternoon, a government official from Delhi visited for inspection. He arrived in a crisp suit and looked skeptical, until Arvind calmly walked him through every layer of the project with flawless logic and data. The inspector was visibly impressed. "We've had younger consultants who don't know half of this. Where have you been hiding, Mr. Mehra?" "Not hiding," Arvind replied. "Just waiting for the noise to fade." The city whispers back in the city, news began to spread. A blog post titled, "The Ghost Engineer Returns," went viral. It told the story of Arvind Mehra, an unsung hero, a man wrongly accused, now leading one of the most ambitious infrastructure revivals of the decade. Karan's business circles were buzzing. Some mocked it. Others dug deeper. Karan's face turned pale when he finally read the full article. Chief Consultancy Arvind Mehra, the same man he had insulted, mocked, belittled, the same man he thought was useless, was now a national name. He slammed his laptop shut. Old fool's just lucky. One last hurrah before he's forgotten again. But deep inside, a fear crept in, because he realized something. People were starting to talk about Arvind more than him. Rhea's quiet conflict. Rhea stood by her bedroom window that evening, watching the city lights shimmer far below. She had read every article, every news blurb about the Himlok project. She had even seen a picture. Her father in a helmet, hands muddy, surrounded by young men looking at him like he was a giant. And it hit her. She had no idea who her father really was. Not truly. All those years he had never spoken of his sacrifices, never flaunted his knowledge, never corrected anyone. Even when they reduced him to a gardener, a handyman, a burden, and she had believed it. Rhea sat down slowly, guilt twisting in her chest. I never even asked what he used to do. She pulled out an old album, flipping through photographs from her childhood. There he was, carrying her on his shoulders, building her school project, making model bridges with matchsticks. He had always been building things, including her, and she had let Karan tear him down. Back in Himlok at the site office, Arvind looked over the final draft of the Phase 1 completion report. He signed it with a firm hand. Arav stood beside him, a huge smile on his face. Sir, when this project completes, they're planning to name the bridge after someone significant. The locals are suggesting your name. Arvind looked up. Names fade. Let the bridge stand. That's enough. But deep inside, something long buried stirred to life. Not pride, not ego, but quiet redemption. He didn't need the world to bow. He just wanted it to know. He had never stopped being worthy. The rain came down hard that week. Thick sheets hammering rooftops, turning roads to rivers. In the city, umbrellas bloomed like black flowers, but inside the once vibrant Karan Vashisht & Co., the storm had already hit. The company's flagship office, once buzzing with employees, was eerily quiet. Desks sat empty. Phones rang unanswered. Investors had stopped calling, not out of courtesy, but out of resignation. Karan stood in the center of his glass-walled office, staring out at the rain. His face, once full of smug assurance, looked worn. He hadn't shaved in days. His tie hung loose. Behind him, an emergency meeting was underway, but no one looked at him for answers anymore. He had none. The collapse, the final blow, had come that morning. His Dubai partners had filed a lawsuit, accusing Karan of fraudulent documentation. 3 vendors had terminated their contracts. Even his personal bank accounts had been frozen pending investigation. The empire he built, based on flash, networking, and inflated ego, had collapsed like a house of cards. And the worst part, everyone saw it coming. Everyone but Karan. At home, Rhea received the news through a series of emails, messages, and missed calls. She sat on the couch unmoving, the laptop open in front of her. The homepage of a financial news site flashed the headline, Business Tycoon Karan Vashisht faces corporate fraud allegations. A deep sense of nausea crept up her spine. It wasn't just the scandal. It was the shame of what they had become, of how blind she had been. She turned her head slowly toward the mantelpiece, where a photo of her wedding smiled back at her. Her father standing quietly at the edge, holding her veil with both hands like it was made of glass. That image burned in her chest. She hadn't spoken to him in weeks. Not since the night he walked out of their home. And now, all she wanted to do was hear his voice again. Meanwhile, in Himlok, the Himlok Bridge project had reached its final phase. The foundation was solid, the supports firm, and the structure rose against the backdrop of misty hills like a crown. Locals had started calling it the Mira Line. But Arvind never paid attention to the praise. He stayed late at the site, checking beams, reviewing safety tests, and watching young engineers thrive under his guidance. One night, Arav approached him, carrying a file. Sir, we received an offer from a global firm. They want to name you honorary advisor for their Asia-Pacific expansion, with compensation. Arvind looked at the offer. He folded it gently. I appreciate the gesture, but I have enough. Let someone else shine now. Arav stared at him in awe. You really don't want anything? I just want to finish this bridge. And then? Then, go home. Rhea's reckoning that same evening. Rhea arrived outside the orphanage, clutching a small umbrella and a heavier heart. Sister Maria opened the gate, surprised. Mrs. Vashisht, You're here to see your father. The Rhea nodded. Inside, she found Arvind seated in the backyard, a wrench in one hand, fixing a broken swing. The rain dripped gently off the roof. He didn't look up right away. You came? He said quietly. She stepped closer. Papa, I'm sorry. I don't even know where to begin. He set down the wrench and slowly turned toward her. His face was calm, but his eyes were tired. When you were 7, you broke your arm falling from a tree. Remember? She nodded, eyes wet. You cried, not from pain, but because you thought I would be angry. He chuckled softly. I wasn't angry then. I'm not angry now. Rhea broke. She fell to her knees beside him, gripping his hands. I let him talk to you like that. I believed him. I saw you every day and still didn't see you. He held her hands gently. It's easy to forget quiet people in a noisy world. She sobbed into his lap. I want to make it right. I want to bring you back home. He paused, then said softly, I was never gone, Beta. You just stopped looking. Karan's humbling. Days later, Karan stood in front of a government inquiry panel, fidgeting in an ill-fitting blazer. The panelists were stern, unsympathetic. Evidence was presented. Emails, voice recordings, statements from his former CFO. Each one chipped away at the illusion he had built around himself. The final dagger came when one of the panelists, an older official, glanced at Karan's file and said, Interesting. Just last week, we honored Mr. Arvind Mira at the Infrastructure Summit. Are you related to him? Karan's jaw clenched. He nodded stiffly. The official shook his head slowly, disappointed. Strange how honor and disgrace can sit at the same family table. The public recognition a week later. Arvind stood at a podium under a soft spotlight at the National Engineering Summit. Cameras flashed. A crowd of dignitaries, engineers, and students watched in admiration. Arav introduced him with pride. A man whose silence was louder than most men's legacies. Arvind stepped forward, wearing a simple suit, no fancy tie, no written speech. He looked out at the sea of young faces and began, When I was younger, I believed success was about applause. I lost everything chasing approval. Then, I learned that the best structures, like the best lives, are built to last, not to impress. Thunderous applause followed. Somewhere in the back, Rhea watched, hands clasped, eyes full of tears. And beside her, Karan sat silently, surrounded by no one, no cameras, no reporters, just silence. One last conversation. After the ceremony, Karan approached Arvind quietly. He cleared his throat. I was wrong about you. Arvind looked at him, expression unreadable. I know. I thought I was building an empire. Turns out, I was building a wall. Arvind nodded slowly, then said the words Karan never expected, but would never forget. You thought I was worthless because I didn't need to be seen. You measured value in visibility. I measured it in impact. Karan dropped his eyes. Do you hate me? No. But I pity the man who has to fall to learn humility. And then Arvind turned and walked away, dignified, calm, and tall. The sun was gentle the morning Arvind Mira returned home. Not the apartment he had quietly stayed in for years, but the house he had once built, brick by brick with his own hands and his wife by his side. The ancestral home that had been mortgaged, nearly lost, and then left behind when he moved in with Rhea and Karan all those years ago. It had aged, yes. The paint had faded, and the garden was overrun with weeds. But it stood tall, just like him, resilient, unbending, quietly proud. He ran his fingers along the rusted gate, opened the door, and stepped into memory. Dust clung to everything, but it didn't feel abandoned. It felt patient, like it had been waiting. Back to his roots, with help from volunteers at the orphanage and Arav's team, Arvind began restoring the home. Not to showcase it, but to live in it. Simply, honestly, the way he always had. The garden was cleared, the rooms aired out, old photo frames dusted off and rehung. One of them held a picture of him and his late wife, Meena, standing on the half-built Himlok bridge. She wore a shawl, he wore a helmet, and both were laughing. He whispered to the frame, We did it, Meena. Finally, a recognition without revenge 2 weeks after the summit. The Central Infrastructure Board officially renamed the new bridge the Arvind Mehra Suspension Line. The news spread across newspapers, engineering institutes, and online platforms. Students across the country began studying his old blueprints. His name became a case study in resilience, ethics, and engineering brilliance. Offers rolled in, from TV shows, publishers, and consultants. He declined almost all. "Let the bridge speak," he said. His revenge wasn't thunderous. It wasn't public humiliation. It was quiet, lasting impact. The kind Karan could never understand. One final confrontation one day, Arvind sat on the porch, sipping tea, when a black SUV pulled up to the gate. The door opened slowly, and Karan stepped out. Alone, he looked different. Humble, tired, thinner. He approached the steps and stopped at the edge, as if the ground itself had rules now. "I came to return something," he said, holding a small box. Arvind took it. Inside was his old wristwatch, the one Karan had once pawned to impress a client, thinking it was worthless. "I bought it back," Karan said quietly. "I figured it should be with the man who earned it." There was silence. Then Arvind looked up, calm but firm. "Did you come here for forgiveness?" Karan hesitated, then shook his head. "No. I came to say I finally understand what you meant. About value. About silence. About strength. And..." Karan's voice cracked. "I don't think I'll ever be the kind of man you are. But I'd like to learn." Arvind stood. He didn't offer his hand. Not yet. But he nodded. Learning begins when ego ends. But Karan turned to leave. But Arvind called out, "Tell Rhea the garden's blooming again. She's always welcome to see it." Karan paused, nodded once, and walked away. A father reclaimed. The next week Rhea came alone. She brought flowers. Not store-bought, but from their old home garden, carefully picked and bundled. When Arvind opened the door, she didn't speak. She simply held out the flowers. He took them, set them on the table, and held her. For a long time, no words. Just forgiveness. Because some bonds don't need repairing. They only need recognizing. Legacy months passed. The bridge was completed. Arvind was invited for the final inspection and ribbon cutting. He arrived in simple clothes, no security, no fanfare. He walked the length of the bridge alone, felt the vibrations underfoot, touched the metal rails, listened to the wind sing through the cables. He stopped midway, leaned against the rail, and looked down at the roaring river below. He had built this, and in doing so, he had rebuilt himself. He took out a small notebook, his old engineering journal, and wrote the final words on the last page. "Dignity isn't in being seen. Dignity is in doing right even when unseen." He smiled, closed the book, walked back across the bridge, each step light, assured. Epilogue. Years later, a plaque still stands at the entrance to the bridge. It reads, "The Arvind Mehra Suspension Line, dedicated to a man who built more than bridges. He built futures, character, and a legacy that stands stronger than steel." Students walk past it. Families cross it. No one remembers the scandal, but everyone remembers the man. And in a quiet home surrounded by green, Arvind Mehra tends to his garden, flowers blooming again. Children from the orphanage visit every weekend. Rhea comes often, sometimes bringing her own daughter now. And sometimes, when the breeze is just right, Arvind stands on his porch, sips his tea, and whispers to the wind, "Know you know my worth?"